before the diary ends in February 97. And the question we've got is what happens to May afterwards? Well, of course, throughout the diary, she's in love with Everts. And Everts is Everett Sewell, who is in Miami at the time the diary's going on. He and his brother are merchants in Miami. Part of the founding had moved there, actually, when Miami was created with the arrival of the railroad in the 1890s. And so Everts and her don't make it. Her people. We don't know what happens. We do know that he comes to visit for Thanksgiving in the diary. And she says he's changed, and it seems to be cool, but she is alone with him in the parlor a couple times. But we do know that he goes on to be a successful merchant in Miami and is actually elected mayor of Miami several different times. And his brother, who's had a partner with him, writes an early history of Miami. So we know about Everts, but we don't know what happened between them. So it looks like she may be on the road to being an old maid school teacher. She's not getting married. She didn't marry Everts in 97 or 98. And a lot of the other guys have passed her by. And once you got into the 20s in those days, you were getting pretty old for marriage. Luckily for her, the War of 98 leads to a few things, increasing the Navy here. And in 1901, a pharmacist mate in the U.S. Navy named Stephen Douglas, arrives in Key West. He's from Massachusetts originally. In 1898, the Navy created a pharmacist mate, an actual rate that does the pharmacist business of mixing and dispensing drugs and doing all of that. And he was one of the first group of 25 pharmacist mates in the Navy. And so he's here, and he meets May, and they are married in September 1901. And of course, being in the Navy, they start traveling. Of course, the Navy doesn't leave you in one place. I had to fight often to get back in Key West. But anyway, they end up going everywhere. And one of the rat holes I've been working on is they do have 2 children, and there's conflicting things, but I'm pretty sure now I found they were married in 01. They had 2 children, and both of them died in the summer of 1907. I have not found a cause of death, but evidently some could be a childhood epidemic, meningitis, diphtheria, any one of the childhood, but they both died, and so they didn't have any children. And but they go around the country, the Northeast, Naval Academy, New York, Washington, California. He ends up being a lieutenant in the Medical Service Corps, and he goes and retires from the Navy eventually in 1930 after 40 years of service. And then they come back to Key West and live in the same house that she lived in before on Division Street. Now, part of what she does, of course, is she takes over the oldest house somewhere in there, and she tries to make it a museum. I don't know what success she did, but she spent money taking care of it and so forth. He died in 1943 here in Key West. And Navy Clinic, which is on the end of Stock Island, South Roosevelt, which was at the Navy Hospital at the time, there is a street called Douglas Circle that was named for him later on after his death. And all the streets out there are named for medical type people. And so Douglas Circle still exists. And May, of course, was much younger than him. And she lived until 1951. Now, part of the thing was that Earl Saunders Johnson, who they had been close with, who was the son of the Earl Johnson, her brother was killed, came back at the same time with them. And when May died, she left the house, the oldest house, on Duval Street to him. And he put it back to a private residence from the museum. And he lived there until he died. And he was the last Watlington to live in the oldest house before it was sold and eventually ended up in the hands of the state as now. So she got it to be a museum eventually, one way or the other. And Earl Saunders was quite a character in his own right, but that's another story. But one of the things I always like, there's always the rest of the story, as the late Pearl Harvey used to say. Well, the rest of the story, which is quite interesting, is on their travels around the world and stations. In early 1900, they are stationed in California, the Navy medical facilities in California. In 1911, he gets stationed in the Philippines as a result of the Spanish War. The Philippines, in the early part of the century, was an American colony, and it had a large Navy presence, military presence, and it was a Navy hospital at what's now Subic Bay, which was a large thing. So they get stationed in Subic Bay, which is right in Manila, Philippines, in 1911. So he gets permission when his tour is up in 1913 to come back the long way via Europe. He gets a month's travel. I never got a month's travel, I think, in the whole time I was in the military. But he gets a month's travel and 4 months off, leave of absence. They have 5 months, and they catch the ship out of Manila, goes to Hong Kong. Of course, British is controlled by British, gets on the British ship through the Suez, travels throughout Europe, and sails in May of 1911. Sails in May of 13 on the American steamship George Washington from Southampton to New York. So as far as we can determine, she is probably the first Key West woman that circumvents the globe in her travels. And the other interesting part of the story, the reason I think there may be more diaries, is she realizes that she's going to do this. So starting when she left California, guess what? We found another diary of her leaving California and traveling across to the Philippines. And then some entries coming home from Southampton. Not a very interesting diary, unfortunately, because what else are you going to write about when you're on a ship transiting the Pacific and the Atlantic at the time? You know, this who you meet, but a diary keeper still. So is there more diaries out there? I still think so. And the interesting thing is her diary she kept is, you can see the accelerated diary. This is the original one from 90s. This is the 1911, same manufacturer. So where's the ones between 96 and 1911? There's got to be more stuff and more letters and stuff that we haven't found. So that's a project for somebody else. A rat hole I don't have time to go down.